Welcome to the Criminal Department, where we delve deep into the dark and twisted minds of some of history's most notorious criminals. Today, we bring you the chilling story of Donald Leroy Evans, a man whose ruthless acts of violence left a trail of pain and suffering across the United States. This is a tale of a drifter turned serial killer, whose life of crime began with petty theft but escalated into something far more horrifying. Donald Leroy Evans was born on July 5, 1957, in Watervliet, Michigan. From the outset, Evans' life was marked by instability and hardship. Raised in a troubled home environment, he faced numerous challenges growing up, including reports of abuse and neglect. His early years were a precursor to a life of delinquency and violence. By his teenage years, Evans was already well acquainted with the criminal justice system, having been arrested multiple times for theft, burglary, and other minor offenses. His interactions with the law only seemed to fuel his disdain for society and authority. In his late teens and early 20s, Evans adopted a transient lifestyle, traveling across the United States with no clear direction or purpose. He would drift from town to town, living on the fringes of society, picking up odd jobs and committing petty crimes to sustain himself. It was during these years that Evans' behavior became increasingly erratic and violent. His temper flared at the slightest provocation, and he developed a reputation as a dangerous drifter. The turning point in Evans' life came in the late 1980s, when he crossed the line from petty crime to murder. His first known victim was a young woman named Beatrice Louise Ruth, whom he encountered in Mississippi. Ruth, a 10-year-old girl, became Evans' first confirmed kill when he brutally assaulted and murdered her in August 1991. Evans would later claim that Ruth's murder was a spontaneous act, driven by a compulsion he couldn't control. This murder marked the beginning of a killing spree that would span several states, including Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. Evans targeted the most vulnerable members of society: women, children, and the elderly. His modus operandi involved luring his victims with false promises of help or friendship, only to assault and kill them once they were isolated. He was a predator who preyed on the trusting and the unsuspecting, leaving a trail of terror in his wake. What set Donald Leroy Evans apart from many other serial killers was his apparent enjoyment of inflicting pain. Witnesses and survivors of his attacks described him as a man who took pleasure in torturing his victims. His assaults were not just acts of violence, they were acts of sadism. Evans would often prolong his victims' suffering, physically and psychologically tormenting them before delivering the final blow. This sadistic streak added a chilling dimension to his crimes, making him one of the most feared criminals of his time. For years, Evans managed to evade capture, largely due to his transient lifestyle. He was a master at blending into the background, moving from one place to another without leaving a trace. His lack of a fixed address, combined with his use of multiple aliases, made it difficult for law enforcement to track him down. Evans thrived on the anonymity that came with being a drifter, using it to his advantage to continue his killing spree.
The manhunt for Donald Leroy Evans intensified in the early 1990s as police linked him to a series of unsolved murders across the southern United States. His arrest finally came in 1991 after the murder of Beatrice Louise Ruth. Evans was captured in Louisiana following a routine police stop, during which officers found evidence linking him to the crime. His arrest marked the end of his freedom, but it also opened the door to a series of chilling confessions.
Once in custody, Evans confessed to the murder of Beatrice Ruth and shockingly claimed responsibility for over 70 other murders across the United States. These confessions sent shockwaves through the criminal justice system and the public, as law enforcement scrambled to verify his claims. While many of these confessions remain unverified, Evans' detailed accounts of his crimes painted a picture of a remorseless killer with a deep-seated hatred for humanity. The courtroom drama that followed Evans' arrest was intense. He was tried and convicted for the murder of Beatrice Ruth and sentenced to death in Mississippi in 1993. The trial brought to light the gruesome nature of his crimes, with testimonies from survivors, investigators, and experts painting a harrowing picture of Evans' violent tendencies. Donald Leroy Evans spent the remaining years of his life on death row, awaiting execution. Despite his incarceration, Evans continued to make headlines, often sending letters to the media in which he described his crimes in graphic detail. His lack of remorse and continued desire for attention made him a figure of infamy. Evans' life on death row was marked by numerous legal appeals and attempts to overturn his conviction, but all efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. On January 5, 1999, Donald Leroy Evans was stabbed to death by another inmate while on death row at Parkman Penitentiary in Mississippi. His death marked the end of a brutal chapter in the annals of American crime. The true extent of Evans' crimes may never be fully known, as many of his confessions remain unverified, however. His legacy as a cold-blooded killer who terrorized multiple states remains etched in the minds of those who followed his case. The story of Donald Leroy Evans raises troubling questions about the nature of evil and the factors that drive individuals to commit such heinous acts. Was Evans born a killer, or was he a product of his environment? Did his troubled upbringing set him on a path of violence, or did he make a conscious choice to become a predator? These questions may never have definitive answers, but they continue to haunt the families of his victims and the investigators who sought to bring him to justice. As we conclude this episode of the Criminal Department, we are reminded of the darkness that can exist within the human soul. Donald Leroy Evans was a man who lived on the fringes of society, but his actions had a profound and devastating impact on the lives of his victims and their families. His story serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, justice, and the ongoing fight against those who seek to harm others. Stay tuned for more stories of the world's most infamous criminals. And remember to like, subscribe, and share our content. Until next time, stay safe and aware.